any news articles around here and photocopies. It's just unbelievable. So just listen to the rustling of the leaves, and you'll get that. You'll get those. Imagine it's bush sounds.
Rustle, rustle, rustle. Okay, Lynn.
Okay, first up, a kangaroo that stalked the Melbourne suburb of Dallas for 2 hours yesterday was shot dead by police. Police and fisheries and wildlife officers tried unsuccessfully to catch the rogue roo, which was shot in Kiwa Crescent at 2:20 p.m.
Yes, wanted dead or alive, the person who shot the rogue roo.
That's a bit rough, they reckon. The closest roos to Broady are up at Jellybrand Hill National Park, and they reckon what it did was went down a drain and then hopped down the 6 kilometres of Mooney Ponds Creek down into Dallas, where it did a JR and went feral. No, there's no way we're answering the phone. And yeah, and they couldn't even control this one kangaroo, and obviously it was scared out of its wits and hopping all over the place.
All we can suggest is next time there is a lost kangaroo in a Melbourne suburb, give us a ring and we'll come down and catch it for you. Surely there are people at Arthur Island Fisheries and Wildlife that can catch a kangaroo. They are reasonably hard to catch. People at the zoo have caught them. They've got out and worn rampant in Carlton during weekdays, and they've caught them without shooting them. Why can't they catch them up there? Just off the planet.
A bit difficult to chase them on horses in a Melbourne suburb.
No, not at all. Easy. Piece of piss. Who said that?
Doesn't bode well for the ducks. Joan Kern has announced some plans to try and make it life a little bit easier for our ducks when duck season opens.
They have time for breakfast before they get shot now.
Apparently there's a 10 a.m. starting time, so all our duck shooters are going to sit in the grass and wait till 10 o'clock. They've also proposed to start the duck shooting season in the middle of the week, so all of the little weekend shooters won't be out there to start it off. Gives them maybe 3 days grace for the ducks to get themselves organised before they get the avalanche of weekend shooters.
I have it on really good authority that the reason we have problems with duck shooting is a number of people in fisheries and wildlife, national parks and throughout the government bureaucracies are indeed duck shooters and love duck shooting, and so any restrictions have to be very delicately brought in. I think we said a few weeks ago that the obvious thing for duck shooting is first an ID course, and I have again on my little hotline some news that there is going to be an excellent ID course perhaps coming up from Conservation Forest and Lands that people have to do before they get a duck shooter's licence. Step 1. Step 2, I think, is that people have to be a member of a field and game association before they can shoot ducks. It means that people are registered and can be deregistered, and if they're not a member of the Field and Game Association, in other words, they go out and blast hell out of cormorants and pelicans and things like that, then that's it. They lose their licence, suspended forever, and they're also not a member of the Field and Game Association. That means that the Field and Game Associations themselves will have some interest in monitoring what fisheries just cannot provide the staff to do, and that is why this may indeed, as one of the guys brought up, be a bit of a disaster.
Yeah, well, National Party politicians have predictably gone Burko about this. The reason for putting it at 10 a.m. in the morning is so that the duck shooters can see the ducks and they can see which ones are restricted and which ones aren't. But even the publicity officer for the Victorian Field and Games Association, Mr Graham Eames, said that the proposed starting time is far too late, and what he's worrying about is that the irresponsible shooters are going to be too blind to see anything by 10 o'clock in the morning. And of course it brings us back to that point. It is illegal to be in charge of a firearm if you're over .05. And it's obvious that a few breathalyzers out on the lakes, a few police in punts might quieten down that side of it a little bit more.
I don't think I would dress up in a blue uniform and go for a punt at the opening of duck shooting season, Roger. Let's be practical. Too many people would go for the blue-bellied copbird.
Accidents can happen.
Accidents can happen.
The RSPCA have had perhaps one of the more amusing comments in this little debate. They reckon that the time is not late enough, and they believe that the duck hunting opening should be midweek at about 4 p.m. to ensure that CF&L officers have got enough time to get their act together.
Talk about farting around the edges of a problem. That's just absolutely ridiculous. Look, with duck shooting, it's got to be... Look, to give you a description of what the actual problem is, it's sort of there's two things. There's devil and deep blue sea. On one thing, there's animal liberationists and a whole lot of crew, and we had this debate around a campfire on Saturday night, actually. People who don't like duck shooting. and who don't want to see any animals killed. And that's fair enough, that's a personal view. But the reality of the situation is this, that lots of people do like duck shooting, and there are out there lots of responsible duck shooters, people who take it as a sport who don't shoot ducks on the water. And surprisingly enough, to a whole lot of people who like being a tad racist in this, it is often the European people with the tradition of hunting behind them that are far better with duck shooting. It's the Australians who make up the majority of the ob element. Now, that's not mutually exclusive or a golden rule, but from the observation of a chap I spoke to who spent a lot of time out with duck shooters, that was his opinion. He described an area which will go unnamed of doing a bird count of 40 species before the day before the opening of the duck season. 300 freckled ducks, which are the rare duck that everyone is talking about at the moment, Victoria's rarest duck, were on this lake. There was a breeding colony of cormorants, there were pelicans, there was all kinds of wading birds and so on. 1,200 shooters turned up to this particularly good season. Dawn came, it sounded like the start of the Second World War. Birds fell everywhere, dogs charging through the swamp, grabbing dead, injured, sick ones, cormorant chicks freaking out and jumping out of the nests and drowning and getting grabbed by dogs and dragged back, and the owners just grabbing them by the neck and whirling them back into the water again. After that shoot, they went out again at their own peril, because there's still the old bit of shot flying around, and found 100 or more of the freckled ducks killed. No fisheries officers were in attendance for the shoot. Now, it's almost impossible for fisheries officers to cover every wetland and every swamp. They're so understaffed, and a lot of them have got to get on well with the locals, and duck shooting is one of the greatest points of controversy. There needs to be people specially employed duck shooting to oversee those areas and to oversee that shooters abide by the law. Also, probably the local police could be more involved in this kind of protection too, because they are the ones, as Roger said, who deal with firearms law, and they are the ones who are dealing with people using guns when they're blind drunk. So duck shooting is something that needs to be brought under control, but not in a classic Breeny way. And no amount of changing times a day is going to have any effect if you haven't got the enforcement. Who's going to know if Joe Bloggs struttles off the swamp and has a few shots at dawn? The shooters are getting into such a rebellious mood at the moment, and there's such a black and white line being drawn, that a lot of people will be starting to shoot animals out of spite rather than just for the opening of the duck shooting season. So it looks bad, and it's a bit of piecemeal tinkering by the groups who are doing it. The changing, it's not the point, the time of day it starts, it's the bloody idiot that's got the gun. That's the point. 10 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 3 o'clock, after lunch, before lunch, Tuesday, Wednesday on a public holiday, it's going to make SWFA difference to what the hell's going on.
It's not as if intelligence sort of rises with the sun and declines at the same rate in the evening or anything like that.
It's just being linked into the opening time for the pub. It's unbelievable.
Also, I mean, if I want to drive a car, I have to have a licence and I have to pass a test. If I want to fly a plane, I have to have a licence and pass a test. If I want to shoot a gun, I think I should have to have a licence and pass a test.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think particularly with duck shooting, you should do a license. Now, hopefully this one about IDs will come through, and as a possibility could be quite good. It's quite tough to identify a duck. You've got to be a pretty good bird watcher. A good shooter will know a duck on the wing, backwards, forwards, from the underside or sitting on the water or whatever, and will not get them mixed up. A yob shooter would not have a clue and should not be able to pass the test. And so hopefully that'll pan things out. I'm sure responsible shooters don't like yob shooters. Shooting birds in the water is most unsportsmanlike, it's most unskilled, and shooting birds in the molting too, because the timing of the opening of the duck season is another critical thing. If they don't give time for the birds to finish their molt, then a lot of them are stranded on the water and unable to fly properly when they're spooked off, and are very, very easy targets. They've also got to give all birds in the swamps time to finish brooding. Okay, we might lose a few ducks up north if the breeding season goes to April instead of March, but that's more ducks for the next year for you to shoot. And so by shifting the breeding season back, I'm sure if there was better and tighter liaison between the duck shooters from the associations and the sporting clubs and between people who knew something about ducks, that we get a better result. Okay, next on Notes the News.
Moving on to bushfires. Burning sparks caused by lines swinging too close and arching have been blamed for starting a number of devastating fires. A number of experts have indicated, one saying that the sparks can actually be blown 300 metres and start fires around power lines. Going to the other extreme, another group is saying it's only 12 to 15 metres. Probably it's somewhere in the middle or either or both. But certainly the electricity authorities are having a rethink about their power supplies in areas where fire is a definite threat during summer.
Well, I was burnt out in the Mount Macedon fires, and semi-successfully was involved in the case litigation against the SEC, so I had a lot of personal experience with both bushfires started by power lines. I was also down in the Western District in 1977, just after the fires down there, and 76 was it, and saw those fires, most of which were started from power lines arcing, and also from the fuses in the power lines at Port Campbell. When I was living down there, they started quite a few fires because when there's a short in the power line, a tree blowing over the fuse would blow, melt and not hit the container and land in the scrub. The principal cause of fires in Victoria, the principal vegetation that's most flammable at the height of the fire season is European grass. Yes, European grass dies off. Roger?
Yeah, most of them start on European grasslands. A lot of them move into forests. The one that Bob was talking about that burned him out started in on farmland actually.
Started on a roadside.
With sparks arcing in East Trentham. And that burnt across quite a few paddocks because I'd just ridden my pushy along the same road the week before, and it took the fire, I think, about the same time as I rode through to get through to Macedon. But that did start on farmland and then burnt through the bush for miles.
That's right. And it's the European grass that provides first the high speed for it to travel, because in the forest the wind speed is slowed, and so the fire is slowed. On the open paddocks there's nothing to slow the wind speed, and ask anyone who was in the Ash Wednesday fires, the percentage of people killed, the highest percentage was definitely in the grassland areas, Framlingham, Warrnambool to Timboon. In that area there was some 25 people killed, and yet there wasn't very many more than that people killed, and that was out of some of 500 to 1,000 people living in that area, and out of areas including Mount Macedon, the Belgrave, Beaconsfield, Cockatoo areas and all that, there was only a similar number of people killed, despite the fact it affected almost 100 times the population. No, they were in bush areas, the latter crew, and the ones where the higher mortality was were in areas of grassland where there was no inhibiting factor to the fire. Also, European grassland, unlike native grassland, dies, as we said, forms thick swards. What the SEC's been doing in their absolute abundant ignorance, but hopefully there'll be some change, we have spoken to people in SEC who think they're going to change things, is that they've been employing contractors to clear under power lines. In South Gippsland, they have done the most idiot things and created fire hazards right, left and centre. One particular case down to Port Franklin, they cleared half a kilometre of Melaleuca swamp that had been there for over 100 years, that had never touched the power lines at any time, and that if the power lines did arc or spark due to any kind of branch or something falling on them from another tree or getting blown an exceptionally high speed wind, the chances are Melaleuca swamp would never burn because it was wet all year. Native vegetation does burn, but it burns a lot less ferociously, and the ignition point is a lot lower than the European vegetation, European grasses that replace it when you clear it. So by clearing the native vegetation from underneath power lines, they clear both the fire retardant species, which tend to be things like silver wattle, young blackwoods, species that come up in areas that are damaged, species that are very common on our roadsides, and replace them with highly inflammable species like European grasses. There is so much evidence for this. I have put the South Gippsland Natural History Museum has put together a report on fire and roadsides, and it has been distributed reasonably widely. It's due for a revamp. There is a roadsides group that meets, but there's a lot of resistance to the ideas about fire. People still perceive the bush as fire hazard wherever it is, and councils and local CFAs still go around, Country Fire Authority branches still go around clearing roadsides, creating fire hazards. There's enough evidence at the moment, according to a broker I spoke to, an insurance broker, for a case of litigation to be mounted against the SEC for clearing a roadside and producing a fire hazard. So hopefully that kind of thing might make the buggers see what's exactly going on. The amount of money in fire ecology research in Victoria at the moment, effectively zilch, worth about 1 or 2 wages. There is no research on the effects. There is very little research done on the flammability of bush. In Tasmania, they've got flammability figures for a whole lot of native plants. The Forestry Commission in 1983 produced a booklet called Fires, Trees and Farms, which gave flammability ratings for various species of trees, but those ratings weren't worth very much because they don't show the flammability depending on wind speed, depending on how dry the bush is at the time and so on. So a whole lot more research is needed, but just rule of thumb, common bloody sense will tell you that European grass, which is dead and dry, is going to burn a hell of a lot better than native bush, which will stay green right through summer. And that even applies to and even a whole lot of other factors too that come into roadsides, like wiregrass is one that'll go up with a woof, but you can stick your arm in it and not get burnt because it doesn't burn very hot. So even the fact that things take off and burn rapidly doesn't necessarily mean they're a super high fire danger.
Well, that was no more relevant than in the Melton fires a few years ago, where the fire was travelling to speeds, I think, of, I can't remember the figure, but it was well over 50, 60 kilometres an hour at times. And that was mainly burning through European grasses, which have double the amount of flammable material and burn at much hotter temperatures. And if there had been more tree belts through that part of the world, the fire would have burnt the trees, sure, but every time the fire ran into a tree belt, it would have slowed down and stopped and would have spotted behind the tree belt and then got fast again. So you need the trees on the farms in large farming areas who've got a lot of grass there just to be able to stop these fires. And
if the trees have got a native intact understory with them, they're even more effective fire breaks instead of just grazing underneath the trees and not fencing your tree lines on farms. But if those tree lines have got a native understory, many of those understory plants will be fire-resistant species. For instance, where I was burnt out at Mount Macedon, there was a little hut just on the corner from where I was living that was completely surrounded by silver wattle, stripped right over to the roof of the hut. Now, that hut wasn't burnt, and yet the guest house that I was in was completely gutted by the fire. And the silver wattle in that particular case had a role to play. Who can say in a fire that's so fickle? Fires tend to burn patches here and there all over. They don't just burn black everywhere. They go all over the joint. What the exact reason was would appear on circumstantial evidence of the most flimsy kind that the fire retardant nature of the silver wattle indeed saved this little fibro shack from burning. And so there's lots to be learned. Also at Mount Macedon, the fire burnt down on a northerly wind past Macedon and along the highway, igniting a whole lot of messmates. The people who owned the land there had cleared the understory from the messmates. They were just standing free in paddocks and they'd been grazed and God knows what, so the understory was completely missing. When the wind changed to a southwesterly, it came roaring up and burnt across and ignited the bark of the messmates like blowtorches throwing flames across. There were no fire retardant species that would normally be there, like blackwoods and silver wattles, to slow the speed of the flames and to also buffer the flames of the messmates, and they ignited European grassland on the other side of the road, which had been heavily damaged, and roared up through European grass, which was on the rail reserve at Macedon, and straight into the township, killing a couple of people and destroying thousands of houses. So there's a whole lot of examples of areas, okay, you can't say dead for sure, but it looks damn close that on circumstantial, common sense evidence that our whole thinking about fires needs to be redone. And indeed, sparks may fly a couple of hundred metres from an SEC line, but the point is that if they get that information, it may indeed give them an excuse to clear all trees within 200 bloody metres of their power.
I don't think they could afford it. What it does say,
I hope not.
What it does say in this article is that they're putting wider spacings on low voltage lines, and that is going to be one of the things that if the lines are better set up so that they won't do so much arcing, they won't send so many sparks out into the wind during high winds, and that's what the SEC needs to do. And I think they'll see that even if sparks are going to travel 150 metres, that it's no use decking all the vegetation within that 150 metres, and you've got to get into better systems of fire protection with power lines.
That's right, and starting to replant native vegetation, particularly the pioneer and fire retardant species like blackwoods and silver wattles where they're appropriate. In the land I come from, South Gippsland, quest for an ape as big as King Kong. Have you got it, Roger?
I've got it.
Here we go.
Here.
Shuffle of papers.
Yeah, here we are.
Shuffle. You found it?
Yeah.
This is absolutely
I've got
remarkable. Would you like to introduce this story, Roger?
Yeah. This is a good one. Most groups of mammals that have evolved during the last 20, 30 million years, the tertiary, have managed to have a big example. We've seen wombats in Victoria, which used to be huge kangaroos, huge rhinoceroses and mammoths and all sorts of things like that. And now we've got evidence of a huge 3 metre tall ape, which they've known has been around for a while, but they now think that it's quite possible that these 3 metre tall apes would have been around about the same time as the early humans, and they think it's quite possible that the early humans wiped them out. And most of these have been fossils discovered by the Vietnamese scientists, and the American anthropologists have actually mounted an expedition to a site in North Vietnam, and the Hanoi government has granted 2 American anthropologists permission to go into the site, and they've got bones of Homo erectus, which is one of the more recent ancient chappies flying around, and his stone weapons are said to be mingled with the remains of the ape Gigantopithecus, the largest primate known to have lived. And they did think that this ape had died out long before ancient man came along, or ancient humans, I should say, and cut this
Careful,
sexist
Roger.
language. And
We've got an article on animal lib.
it's quite possible that they were both around about 500,000 years ago.
There's also an interesting side note too, that the original Gigantopithecus fossils turned up in the remains was discovered in Hong Kong pharmacy 51 years ago. What it was is that there was a particular fossil site, a bank with a whole lot of remains from about 1 million years back, that was used by a number of Chinese in China. It wasn't accessible to paleontologists until quite recently, where they used to dig out all the teeth of various mammals and so on, and put them in potions, and they called them dragon's teeth, and used to get them ground up. And one of the early paleontologists went to one of these pharmacies and found these Gigantopithecus teeth and these giant hominid teeth, and that was where they first described from. This description now, excuse me, is from bones actually found in North Vietnam, and the original excavations were going until the late 60s, and then they were halted by American air raids trying to blow up the very people who were digging up these bones. So, good one for our history.
Yeah, that's another interesting one. And of course, evidence as recent as that, we still get stories of yetis and big feets and all sorts of things like that.
And they're all Gigantopithecans.
Who are they? Are they a remnant of a race of large apes, or what is going on?
A lost punk from the venue thunders through Melbourne, 3 metres high, hairy, looking for a mate. They call Lost and Lonely in the Night. Quickly,
I think I've seen a few of those, actually.
Have you?
Yeah.
A couple on the weekend. A couple of hairy ones running around Refuge Cove. And by the way, plug. If you're sitting there slightly dawdling and not really making up your mind about next week, the boys are on the phone. And we have a note here, Killer Spray haunts Country District. Do we need this? David, you can bring it in, but we've got lots of copies. He can hear us. And but anyway, if you're thinking about going to the prom, give us a ring on 419-0022 straight away. This is the opportunity of your lifetime to see the wilderness of Wilson's Promontory and Bass Strait, and don't let it pass by. Give us a ring straight away, and we're going to go straight into a cart. So
Only a short one. It's 7 minutes to 1 o'clock. You're listening to the Eclectic Parrot. We've got heaps more to go.
Back short.
That's one of the new ID carts that we've been told to play. They've ripped off all the old ones, and so we're not going to get to see them
Did
this
that
week.
say
So
3
it's
triple R on it anyway?
Yeah, I think so. Pretty
Amazing.
jumbled.
Yes, it was a bit jumbled.
What's happened?
Happy birthday. It's 10 years on for Triple R, if you've been listening this morning.
Yes. Iceland, of course, as you know, was recently the site of certain so-called peace talks. But there's been more violence happening. As we know the Icelanders are very proud of their nautical history, and they've been very nautical for the last few years by continuing to hunt whales. And one of the more militant animal preservation people has admitted to sinking 2 Icelandic whaling ships and the demolition of a whale meat processing plant. Said yesterday, which was quite a few days ago, Iceland has chosen to commit terrorism on the high seas against the whale. So this chap has gone in and created quite a bit of violence up there.
I just wonder about that. There's one of the problems with dealing. I know that a lot of the indigenous peoples in the Northern Hemisphere, remembering Iceland's got an incredibly small population and quite a small whaling fleet, that was it that he sunk. The effect that they've had on the whale populations and so on would comparatively be minimal compared to the massive Russian, American, Peruvian and Japanese whaling fleets that have been thundering around, and maybe they should be about the last people on the list for that kind of attention. Okay, Iceland doesn't have much in the way of crime, they don't have much in the way of high security and stuff, and they'll obviously be a piece of the proverbial to knock off a whaling station there. They don't have robberies in Iceland, they don't have any of those problems.
They don't put a RAS into defence.
No, nothing. And so it's the kind of country you'd really like to see keep going, and to treat them like that is pretty well off the air. And I hope he gets busted.
The other parallel is, of course, the French feel quite justified in doing the same things to Rainbow Warrior yachts, and now what was the other one they had a go at? Over in the Indian Ocean the other week? They managed to sink another yacht.
And they pulled the plug on a rubber raft and it's still going round and round with the whole of Greenpeace on it, screaming. Yeah, well, anyway. No, I don't know. Personally, I don't like it. I think the Icelanders are a real peaceable sort of crew. They're pretty ferocious. They've had to fight incredibly hard to get what fishing rights they've got. Remember, they had the cod wars with England not too long ago, and the English sort of didn't recognise the Icelanders' 200-mile fishing zone and sent in their massive cod boats.
They didn't realise they had cod on their side, but...
Yeah, that's right. And with their cod pieces, they thundered out and got hold of all these cod, and the Icelanders, with their gunboats, yes, they do have a couple, managed to cut their trawl lines. It was an incredible brood, and the Icelanders kept their fishing rights. I don't think they should be the marker of attacks. I hardly think they're an example of mass exploitation. The same would go for the Inuit Indians and their killing of seals and so on like that. Indigenous people's taking of wildlife stock. Okay, things might have got very rare and so on, but they should be the last people to achieve attention. It's the mass exploitation that you should be really worried about. And the fact that they've stopped whaling in most of the world is quite sufficient without getting into the whalers in Iceland.
Okay, along the line of animal lib, but coming back to Victoria, there's a report come out in the last week from the Bureau of Animal Welfare, and this report provides experimentation statistics and information from tests on vertebrate animals at 60 Victorian institutions, providing details of time taken for tests, the animals and techniques used, and the reasons for the experiment. Surprisingly, of more than 207,000 animals tested, only 950 were involved in toxicity testing. There's been quite a big debate over the Werribee Animal Research Centre and its potential for toxicity testing on animals. And also surprising, of those involved in toxicity testing, there wasn't any to do with cosmetics and toiletries, which are always brought up as the big thing with rabbits having women's vein aids debut being put into their eyes for testing. Overall, there's been a 14% drop in the number of animals tested compared to the previous year. This is for 84-85, the report that's coming out.
What are they being used for, Lib?
It doesn't actually state what the majority were for.
A lot of them would just be animals on agricultural research stations and in areas like that. There's also a lot of research going on into in universities where they...
Yeah, thermometer up the bum stuff.
Yeah, pretty much.
Look, we've had the thing with animal research, and this is, again, animal lib, in our opinion, goes too far, but those seem to be having some effect in making people more aware, and institutes are less likely to use animals in research. They're becoming sensitive to it.
Well, they've all got ethics committees these days, which is a
very good thing. But native mammals are probably the ones also too in universities, as far as closer to home type effects on animals that have been mistreated in the past. And I think I gave earlier this year, and for those who didn't hear it, I'll give it again, a brilliant example of absolute bloody incompetency in native animals. And the chap came down to me in South Gippsland from Canada, who was doing research on platypus. In 3 months he hadn't managed to catch a platypus in Victoria, which should have made me suss right from the word go. And he was trying to catch them down here, and he was using uplifted fyke nets, which are nets that are used for eels. He had a permit to catch platypus, and what they do is they lift the end of the fyke net. It's an interesting thing that the eelers never are not instructed to do that, and these fyke nets are two wings with a barrel, and at the end of the barrel there's a cone and then there's another net, and if eelers were forced by law to lift the end of that net, then platypus could survive in those nets, but at the moment they drown stacks them. That's a side issue. This chap wanted to catch it for research into the physiology of platypus when they were diving and feeding. I was suspect at the time that somebody else had done it, and years ago there was a chap working at Monash University who I knew quite well, and he'd caught a couple of platypus in Seymour and was looking at them. A couple of things I noticed from the way he did his research was, one, he settled the platypus for over a week and had them reasonably sort of tame, so they didn't freak every time he walked into the lab before he did any testing on them at all. And he returned all his platypus successfully to the wild, back to the original place where he took them from, and did it within about 14 days of catching them. So there was a reasonable chance another platypus hadn't taken their territory, causing strife, and had no mortality whatsoever. Unfortunately, I was sucked in, as they say, and I led this bloke to another friend of mine who led him to a platypus which he caught, took back to the lab, and within 24 hours he had it stuffed with diodes and God knows what, was handling it heaps, got it to do a couple of diving experiments, and it died. I heard nothing of it. Next time I saw him was in the foster pub. He told me the story. I cracked the shits and went furious. Since then, he caught another 2 platypus on the same bloody permit, and another one died, and he managed to return one to the wild. That bloke should never, ever again have a permit to catch any native Australian wildlife. In fact, he should be just deregistered as a wildlife researcher. It's absolute incompetence. What he was chasing was a research deadline. What was suffering was the platypus. The same with the silly turkey in Tasmania, who was sticking thermometers in Tasmanian devil brains and all this kind of stuff to find out how hot their brains are. Big bloody deal. And there must be another way of finding out how hot their brains are without killing the animals. That kind of research just infuriates me. The same with the sampling techniques. There was a classic example given, and I'd really like to check this one down. This is a story we've heard, one of these sort of unconfirmed reports, that someone from fisheries, and my apologies to fisheries happen to be wrong, was doing a survey of lead in the occurrence of lead in native birds and animals along Victoria, and they went out with a shotgun full of lead pellets and blasted dozens of birds and animals right along the Victorian coast and checked them for the lead. And of course their results were incredibly invalidated because they filled them full of lead and then they were looking for trace elements of lead. So those kinds of things do happen. Also with some survey work, people have been using, what's that poison called? A Ricon rodent? Rodent, that's the one. Using this poison rodent in freshwater streams and killing stacks and stacks of fish without proper controls and the poison without knowing it's just...
Gueston employed more than 3,000 staff. The important Cooloola National Park is immediately north of the Commonwealth Airport Reserve, which is expected to accommodate the airstrip. Conservationists have long sought to have the entire North Shore area brought up for national park purposes. They will oppose the rezoning. The only opposition we have had from anyone is the conservation group, said Cameron. I am just happy that we have found someone who's prepared to put up some real money and do something.
Great, isn't it? It seemed to be a National Party MP as a requirement to be a developer in Queensland, or at least a really good friend who's a National Party MP, and draw what you like, your own conclusions from that. And there's just example after example of it. This is a great example of Queensland cutting its own throat in tourism. Who the bloody hell wants to come from overseas and see yet another area destroyed? That area of quiet bathing beach that's along there, and that estuary that I've walked along quite recently, is a beautiful area of mixed sort of casuarina woodland. It's a big curled estuary, and they're looking at sort of some 300 acres in there that's sort of higher sorts of sand dunes. And it's a spot-on place. It's really nice bush, and it's a place used by many, many of the tourists who come to Noosa. This intensive development will destroy the nature of Noosa Heads. It's already enough sort of classic type development in Noosa to suit most people. It's a relatively low-key resort. It's not as good as it was 10 years ago, but it's, from my point of view, but for a lot of people's point of view, they say it's an improvement, and it's got enough of that kind of development in it. If Queensland insists on turning the whole place into a series of bloody resorts that are very, very similar to ones found anywhere else in the world, they'll cut their own throat in tourism. They just show the most narrow-minded bloodiness pack of idiots I've ever run into, and yet we can't walk around with that attitude. We've got to get up there and get involved with them. And from the Cape Trib trip, we met quite a few people who are trying to work in Queensland. It's almost cloak and dagger to do anything in Queensland. And the way you'll do them is tourist dollar. It's probably worth a hell of a lot more for tourist dollars, exactly the bloody way it is, without a $30 million development on it. Add that to the Quintrex development up at Port Douglas to the north, and a few others, and what they did to Hamilton Island, like blew it in half with dynamite without any permits or anything like that, and destroyed big chunks of it. You're going for, A for disaster. Green Island, where they have to go and pinch coral from the outer reef and bring it in to restore the areas that have been destroyed. Look, the historic Queensland's an absolute disaster, and if that National Party MP, had 3.25 brain cells, he'd see there's a lot less investment and you get a lot more tourism just by developing areas of natural bushland and declaring it a national park. Most other countries in the world, even third world countries, are absolutely rapt to have areas listed on the heritage listing, absolutely stoked to make national parks where they still can, so they can get the kind of tourism that flows from it, not because they like wildlife. It's about time Queensland woke up. It's just their political system up there is just horrendous, and they make it very difficult to be anything but confrontationist in dealing with them.
Well, the Sun actually has been including a fair amount of stuff lately, and one thing which we'll just mention briefly, because you can get into the areas of scaremongering, but we've got nuclear powered ships coming into Victoria. Well, not nuclear powered ships, but ships that are almost certainly carrying nuclear arms, and the Sun has used the Freedom of Information Act to get off from the government to show that only a 600 metre zone around Station Pier would be immediately evacuated after a nuclear accident aboard a visiting warship. Now, that would include any sort of nuclear accident, no matter how severe it was. And the worst case that you could think of would involve a leak that should see the evacuation of area up to 10 kilometres downwind from the accident. And I think that if Victoria is going to host these stupid things, that at least they should have some sort of decent accident plan and not just assume that nothing's going to go wrong.
600 people would mean they'd evacuate the cafe on Station Pier, a few of the attendants, a couple of the guards, shift the cars. And
they'd stop the train coming into that station.
Yeah, stop the train going into Port Melbourne and maybe give the Housing Commission people a letter with their rent in the next couple of weeks to say if you've been irradiated, please contact the Housing Commission. Your claim for rental discount will probably be considered.
And
that'll be about it.
All the penguins coming into the mouth of the Yarra there, they'd have to give them those little photographic strips to stick to their front.
To see if they're zapped or not.
Yeah.
It's a tough life for a penguin in Melbourne, isn't it? You know, they shifted from Phillip Island to St Kilda Marina to get away from the stuff to get to the source of the food, so no hassle. Now they would have put a development there. They've just moved, there's a small colony at Station Pier, and now they want a multi-million-dollar development there. And if it blows up, the penguins within 600 metres, probably someone will come and dig them up and throw them out in the water a bit further and say, you're 700 metres away now, boys, you'll be sweet. Great.
Yeah, well.
Just as well penguins aren't 6 foot high. They used to be 30 million years ago. They come back and get ya.
We should say something good, I suppose.
Something positive? Can I have one more negative?
Oh, all right.
Dear Harry. Harry Butler. What's happened to Harry Butler?
Oh, Harry. You're going to talk about that now.
Dear Harry. Oh, God. What do you say about Dear Harry? Dear Harry came a gutser a few years ago on the Franklin Dam issue, which brought a few crew undone at the time. And Dear Harry got a job working for the Hydroelectric Commission to study the effects of flooding of the dam on wildlife in the Franklin River, and said
he found they'd get very wet.
Found they get wet, and a lot of them couldn't survive with snorkels and a few other bits and pieces of interesting information. But Dear Harry copped such an incredible public backlash that until now he has completely disappeared from the scene. And Dear Harry now has been employed by the Northern Territory government to say that Kakadu National Park should not be part of the World Heritage List. This is a beautiful example of a naturalist getting used. And what he says is quite right. It's who's using it, which is the problem. I mean, well, I don't even know if he's quite right, but Harry Butler said yesterday that to be included in the World Heritage List area is supposed to be the Rolls-Royce of the world environment. And they specify that it's got to be outstanding, it's got to be exceptional, it has to be absolutely tops. We're offering them here as a clapped-out Holden. It has been beaten out by the pastoral industry, beaten out by buffalo, by pig and wild horses. All in all, it's a pretty poor offer. Unfortunately, Harry may be right for some areas of Kakadu National Park, but as you've been listening to the Parrot, probably the only information that's fair dinkum about water buffalo and Kakadu, and give you any background at all on it, you would have heard that the National Park Services, each of these areas has been included in the National Park, have had a 3-stage roundup in cooperation with the Buffalo Industry Council, that they round the buffalo up first by air, they go in and they take them on the ground in 2 stages, and they shoot what buffalo are left in the park. They do the same for pigs, the same for goats, and the same for horses. That the Northern Territory has currently got a brucellosis typhoid, I think it is, campaign, where they're the only state territory government in this particular case, with the only government instrumentality who've got an absolute deliberate campaign that's spreading to Queensland of eradicating all feral animals for the fear of them spreading disease if they got into the north of the country. That includes foot and mouth. And so those kind of feral considerations that Harry's bringing up are just NA and not applicable to Kakadu. The area should be given a chance to regrow. The fact that it's been attacked by feral animals in the past is no reason to wipe it right off. Those northern areas, if you listen to the interviews that we did with Don Tulloch, the guy who'd studied water buffalo and lived up there for 20 or 30 years, very dynamic landscapes and recover exceptionally quickly from grazing. And the native fauna will come back very, very fast indeed, because they're such dynamic landscapes. They suffer natural disasters anyway, and so they're probably in a lot better state to recover than, say, would be a southern area of equivalent size. So Harry's being used, done like a dodo, but no worse than the scientists who turned up at the bloody St Kilda inquiry. No worse than the people from Conservation Forests and Lands that allow themselves to be quoted at St Kilda inquiry out of context to support the development that would wreck the penguins. No worse than the bloody researchers here who've done all that work on penguins and found no problem. No worse than all the wimps that sit at universities and sit in government committees and never say anything when they watch disasters float them by, saying, oh, we don't have enough information.
Cheery. Yeah, it's no good...
Got a cheery one now?
It's no good keeping the good bits and excising the bad bits, so a map of the place would look like a doily. There's just no point. really. Yeah, all right, we've got a good thing. Callista Primary School,
this is a ripper.
which is up in the Dandenongs, among the
Riding through the Dandenong
among the
ranges.
towering mountain ashes, they call it. There are
With the horse
lots of little
for me
towns
friend.
like Callista now that people like to live in. One of the reasons they like living in them is because they're in the middle of the bush and you can hear birds chirping all the time instead of trams clanging and lots of things like that. What they're doing up there they're getting a community feeling into the school, and the parents are working in with the teachers to educate the kids. And so what the school's doing is looking more into the community, and they've set up an environmental studies centre at the school so that other schools can use it and investigate the special terrain around Callista. And so Callista Primary School has been nominated to represent the Maroondah Education Region in the School Community Award, and that's going to be judged early in December, and we like to see initiatives like this getting awards, and I hope that they do figure well in things like that, and lots more schools should look outwards to the community for what they can do, and they should look outwards to the environment too and get everyone involved in that sort of education.
Kids are absolute naturals to this kind of gear. Like, there's the biggest buzz. I suppose the most positive thing is to see children's reaction to the bush and to visit kids and talk to kids and get their viewpoints. I've been working with some ABC stuff, and they did interviews with kids, and they just got such brilliant, commonsensical, uncluttered attitudes to things that as an adult you can learn a hell of a lot about it. It's amazing how well the human mind works before it's polluted by sex, drugs and rock and roll. Lib.
We've got a bit more bad news here, unfortunately. Death
Where's
and
the
destruction.
violin?
Oh, no, well, if we're going to deal with that track, or maybe we should have if we're going to deal with that article, we should maybe play a track and
This is a big one.
Bit of
and
respite.
gird our loins.
Yeah.
This is Lou Reed.
You gird your loins, I'll leave mine alone.
This is Lou Reed from the '74 album Sally Can't Dance. And
Put, 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 put. That is the sound of a small motorboat heading out into Bass Strait. Is the anonymous sound of multiple wildlife making a noise. Yes, you should be out there cruising among the islands of Bass Strait around Wilson's Promontory. Have a view that you've never had before. Give us a ring now, 419-0022, and for 80 little smackaroos and a concession if you're unemployed or whatever, you can have a unique opportunity to travel the Straits in late spring. And on the weekend after next, which is blah blah and the blah blah of November. I should really look up the dates.
Around about
if you
the
want to
28th, I
go,
think.
around about 28th, 29th
Something
of
like
November.
that.
If you want to go on this trip, give us a ring now, 419-2066, and you'll get out
29th and 30th of November.
29th and 30th of November, and you can come down to Gippsland Friday night, and we leave really early on Saturday morning, say 7 o'clock. Cruise out among the waders and waterbirds, which in itself, Corner Inlet, is magnificent. We do lots of U-turns, lots of stops and goes, and we have undoubtedly one of the oldest and bestest people in Bass Strait to show us around. Don't we, Mark? Big nod from the off-air part of the studio. And don't we, Lib? You had old Reggie with you?
Of course, yeah.
Yes, Reg in the raw.
Unique.
Absolutely. Skipper's hat, dark glasses, gumboots and nothing else. It was a ripper trip. It's just unbelievable. And the snorkelling, yes, bring face mask, snorkel flippers. We'll look after you, introduce you to you and make sure you don't drown. And that'll blow you right out. The water was cold, but you got used to it, didn't you, Lib?
Oh, I could have stayed in the water all day. It was beautiful.
Just so refreshing. Air so clean. Everything about it is brilliant.
She's still got that pruny look about her.
Glowing it is.
Glowing, yeah, everyone picked up. Yeah, your northern suntan washes off in 10 minutes, but your southern one sticks like to a blanket. But anyway, so give us a ring, 419-0022, or if you can't remember that number, 419-2066 after the show, which finishes at 2 o'clock today. I don't know who's listening out there because we've had a time change of schedule, but if you haven't been on a parrot trip before, you're missing out on an experience of your lifetime, and this is a really good chance to go or learn about the Straits, to see the Marine National Park. This is probably the only trip ever to the Marine National Park since it's been declared, which is something that the Nationals don't like. So come and have a look at the Marine National Park, and you will see, as I saw, that it is as good, if not better, than anything in Queensland. There are no seals in Queensland. There's no bloody penguins. There's no albatross. It's boring. Go down south and see the lot.
It's your only shirty because there's lots of wasps and stingy things and
Oh, shit, you're not joking. I'm still scratching. All right, Heytesbury.
Okay. In The Sun on Wednesday last week, we had the big headlines on page 3. Killer spray haunts a country district. Slightly reminiscent of big headlines for the Yarram region a few years ago on 245T, where they there had a big scare and it was plastered across the papers. Details of cancer deaths, sickness, high stock losses and wildlife destruction were said to be emerging in the Western District 23 years after the spraying of a deadly insecticide. A number of people, one of whom had been directly involved with insecticide poisoning through having her house sprayed for bugs in the house, and who has subsequently become very sick, and their whole family is unable to go back into the house. They've become very involved, 2 people, in a private survey. And they've been trying to study what's been happening in the Heytesbury area after insecticide was sprayed on 90 farms during February and March of 1963 to combat grass-eating grubs. The next day, in The Age, we had a nice reassuring article saying that a survey conducted by the Anti-Cancer Council had indicated that there was actually a lower incidence of cancer in the area in comparison to the state's average. And we're also given reassuring details of how they handled the aftermath of the poisoning down there, to do with protecting everyone from milk that was coming out of the area because it had become contaminated, and various quarantine measures. So on the 12th of November we have a nice article saying how terrible it is, and then on the 13th we're reassured that everything's okay and they did everything they possibly could, that it was just a one-off thing, and we shouldn't worry about the more general issue involved, which is the insecticides that are being used every day.
Does a chemical company run The Age lately? There's The Sun, we've been traditionally told that don't read The Sun, hopeless paper, all you good intellectuals get out there, read The Age. The Age has been full of that much shit lately, it's just unbelievable. Crapulous articles floating through one after the other, or no article at all, like stuff on the Rhine or this Heytesbury thing. As for the Anti-Cancer Council, it depends on how many people they looked at. The article in The Sun's very specific and gives the affected area, which is to the west of Simpson, quite a small area, and the 90 farmers. You can bet your bottom dollar that the Anti-Cancer Council is talking about the background cancer probably for 100 years in the Colac region entirely, anything to avoid looking at the problem. The Heytesbury area, the history of it, was an area that was initiated by Henry Bolte. It was all bush. It was a mixture of mostly dry sclerophyll, rolling country with little bits and pieces of wet stuff mixed up in it, and they cleared thousands of acres there in the 50s to create a dairy farm. It was a government-induced scheme. Biologically, it was an absolute disaster, and after the clearing of such a massive area, it was just totally invaded by cockchafer beetles, which hadn't been seen there before, which not only invaded the Heytesbury area, but also went on to invade the farmland to the south of Princetown, Port Campbell, and all those really rich areas down there. And the response to all of this has been was the spraying that was induced. And this spray was, do you catch the name of the spray there? It was a chlorinated hydrocarbon, a particular one that's never been tested, never been registered, and was sprayed all over these farms by a whole lot of goons who didn't know what the hell they were doing. And of course it poisoned lots of people. Of course it caused lots of cancer, stuff like that. Just use your common sense and you'll work that one out. And the attitude towards it has just been off the planet, and these people now, after 23 years, are coming back and having a crack at it and trying to get the wrongs that have happened righted, and hopefully getting compensation for the people. They've listed here unconfirmed reports of at least 70 deaths, 17 confirmed cancer deaths, 5 people who died from cardiac arrest at an early age, 3 asthma deaths, 9 deaths from brain tumours, and cot deaths. Case of multiple deaths in one family on or near neighbouring properties. Calves taking fits and dying, cats, dogs, birds, rabbits and chickens all dying, widespread heart complaints, nervous conditions and high blood pressure. Okay, a lot of these things are going to be mixed up with the background of the results from normal farming, but there is definitely a case to be answered down there, and it was a total ecological disaster. It was only made worse by continued spraying.
The chemical was actually called Dieldrin and had been tested, but only in accordance with the requirements of the day. One of the big problems was that the tests done had no way of establishing that there'd be a high secretion of the toxic material into substances in milk of animals. So, of course, it went straight into the cow's milk. Or the poison's subsequent accumulation in grazing animals because of this. It's been one of the problems with if anyone's been following the debate with 2,4,5-T of tests done with various chemicals, that they test them in isolation in very high concentrations, and it's very hard to establish how they're going to react in the natural environment and also in combination.
Well, the ripper with 2,4,5-T was that was a fantastic story went with that. The 2,4,5-T used at Yarram, Sale and Cairns all at the same time caused patches of high rates of deformity among children born in all three of those areas. That wasn't picked up in the Australian press, it was picked up in New Scientist in England, but the fact that all these were incidental. The inquiry into 2,4,5-T looked at pure 2,4,5-D, 2,4-D and 2,4,5-T without any impurities in it, and the principal impurity from poor manufacture is dioxin, which is known to be an incredibly toxic chemical and does have effect. In fact, the only time the Pope in the history of the Catholic Church has wavered and give permission for abortions was after the mass dioxin poisoning in Italy in the late 70s, when he gave permission for some 3,000 women to have abortions at that time from the Catholic Church. So dioxin is definitely implicated. A mystery turned up. Actually, it was a report that was on the Science Show some year and a half after the Yarram incident that gave some clue as to what may have happened. A study group at ANU was simply looking at the amount of poisons used in the amount of 2,4,5-T and 2,4-D that was used in Australia. They were looking at the amount that was imported and the amount used. It seemed that there was an incredibly much higher amount used than what was imported. In other words, unregistered imports were coming in. Further research by them tracked down that the defoliant agent orange, which was a mixture of all these batches of contaminated and bad chemicals that couldn't be sold, that were being used to spray the Vietnamese and spray the forests over there to defoliate them so they could see them to blow them up and burn them better, had been still floating around in shipments, and a shipment had come into Sydney, been pumped out and sold commercially as 2,4,5-T and 2,4-D. Both of these were heavily contaminated with dioxin. It is quite likely that these shipments of really heavily contaminated chemicals made their way through to Yarram, made their way through to Sale, and made their way through to Cairns at the time. Of course, the original study group just looked at the pure chemical without any of its contaminants, so its results were predictable. To find any kind of result on those 2,4-T and 2,4,5-T would take many, many years of research, and they weren't likely to find it anyway. They were employed by the government not to. So they got up on stage and prostituted themselves in Yarram, saying that there was no problem. Interestingly enough, someone jumped up from the audience with a bottle of milky water and said, "Right, drink it. If you think it's so bloody good, drink it. You've just told us it's all safe," and the whole lot of them just shit themselves and looked at this bottle, no one would touch it. And the guy got down again and said, "Well, it's only a bit of milk in water, but it just shows how much full of shit you really are." Mm-hmm. And I think that that's a really good proof pointing case. I don't know how they're going to dodge this one, but the Anti-Cancer Council and all that kind of stuff are just being used in this particular case. I bet my bottom bootstrap dollar that they've just broadened the statistics to get the kind of result that they want. So
that may not be necessarily true, but one of the problems with producing a report and then quoting it as if it was actual evidence that there's no problem down there is that you can't produce this sort of evidence, detailed evidence, overnight or within a week, or in the case of Yarram, a little bit longer, but certainly the type of the sort of time frame you're looking at is beyond anything that's been tackled so far. And with Agent Orange, at a government level, the Vietnam War veterans have been unsuccessful. I commend these two women who are tackling it down at the Haysbury area, but certainly it's going to be very difficult.
Well, there is going to be some legal action in the offing, so that's why they haven't released some details. But we've seen in the past the widespread effects of chlorinated hydrocarbons, and the use of stuff like that for any reason is just not on. There's always a better way to do it.
If you've got to use sprays, there's plenty of alternative sprays these days to Dieldrin, Endrin and Chloridane and things like that for lots of different things. The pyrethrin-based group, for instance, and there should be more research into other counters and biological control, as they found out in a report we did months ago with codling moths.
Well, there was a lot of these sprays are being used also. Some of them are being used for insects and some of them are also being used for weedicides, and there was an interesting report on the Science Show on Saturday when they were talking about the natural herbicidal mechanisms of plants. Say, for instance, when barley seeds germinate, that they put out their own poisons to inhibit the growth of other plants around them. And the fact that plant breeders for years have just been going for the pure food-producing qualities of a plant where it's meant to produce bigger seeds with more seeds, bigger seeds with more protein in them, whereas it might serve them better to go for those things, but also to look for the properties in the plant that produce the chemicals that act as weedicides. So instead of sowing a crop and covering the area with pre-emergent weedicides, what you could do is have a seed that actually did some of the weedicide, some of the job itself,
And also
so that you didn't have to use sprays with it.
And specific and temporary chemicals too.
And he calculated over 100,000 hectares in Tasmania that the cost of this sort of defence for crops was some $20 million a year. So you can see that any developments in that area would certainly add some savings.
Yeah,
significant savings.
What's ecologically correct is economically correct. Basic principle, the eclectic parrot. Don't like hippies who hug trees and batik shirts either. That's been a bit of a problem with that, actually. We went away and with a whole lot of people to Cape Trib, and they didn't realise that we didn't like greenies, and I was really upset because we've always made a point on the show of separating ourselves from greenies. Though there is a bit of dissension even within the studio at times, but batik tree-hugging street theatre crew who love sticking it right up local people and making big scenes about things are not our kind of people. People who work really hard and do their research and work well with local people are our kind of people.
Actually, Bob, that shirt you've got on there is very, very close to batik, wouldn't you think, Roger?
Yeah, it looks like it's been through a bit of a tie-dyeing experience at one stage or another.
Oh, a bit cosmic, Bob.
No, Myers Bargain Basement, along with terry toweling hats, are $1.75. I am just a suburban boy. I do not go for any kind of a grooviness, and I don't care what the bloody hell looks like, and it is not batik, and I'm not a greenie. I don't hug trees.
Methinketh you protesteth too mucheth.
Chemicals, and they continue in the news, and part of the problem is with this, they continue out of the news. And all right, we'll play a track first, then we'll get negative. Yes.
We don't want to do you all to death.
This is Warren Zevon with a nice track, Nighttime in the Switching Yard.